There is a sound that the emergency room makes at 3 in the morning when everything is about to go wrong. It is not a scream. It is not an alarm. It is a silence. A quarter-second gap where the monitors seem to hold their breath, the fluorescent tubes stop buzzing, and somewhere deep in your chest, a muscle you did not know you had clenches tight as a fist. I have heard that sound maybe a dozen times in 22 years of emergency medicine, and every single time it preceded the worst night of someone's life, usually a patient's life, sometimes a nurse's. Once, it preceded the worst night of mine. But the night I want to tell you about, that silence preceded the worst night of a man named Garrett Holloway's life. And I have to be honest with you, I enjoyed every second of it. My name does not matter. What matters is what I am. I am a board certified emergency medicine physician at a level 1 trauma center in a major American city. I will not tell you which one. The lawyers would prefer I didn't. What I will tell you is this: when I started in this emergency department, Bill Clinton was president, the internet ran on dial up, and a gunshot wound to the abdomen still had a 40% mortality rate in the field. I have been in this ER longer than some of the walls. I was here when they renovated the trauma bays in 2004. I was here when a drunk driver brought a pickup truck through the ambulance bay doors, literally through the glass, in 2009. I was here for the factory explosion in 2012 that sent us 31 burned patients in under 90 minutes. Every nurse on this floor knows my voice. Every paramedic crew in the county knows my face. When the radio crackles and dispatch says mass casualty inbound, I am the one they want standing at Trauma 1 with gloves on a plan already forming behind my eyes. I am not telling you this to boast. I am telling you this because you need to understand the weight of what was dismissed. You need to understand exactly what Garrett Holloway looked at, shrugged off, and tried to replace with a spreadsheet. Let me tell you about my emergency department on a normal night. We run 30, 2 beds. On any given evening, we see between 100 and 150 patients. We handle everything from chest pain to psychiatric crisis to the 17-year-old who crashed his motorcycle into a guardrail and arrived in 3 pieces that we somehow had to make back into one. We have a rhythm. It took years to build. The charge nurse, a woman I will call Maria, though that is not her real name, has been running that floor with me for 14 years. She does not need me to tell her to prep trauma 2 when the radio call says incoming penetrating injury. She hears the same thing I hear. She moves before I speak. We have a language that exists below words. The residents rotate through every few months, and the good ones learn it fast. The bad ones wash out. Either way, the machine keeps running, and it ran beautifully. Not perfectly. Nothing in emergency medicine is perfect. Perfect is a word for people who have never had to choose which of 2 dying patients gets the last ventilator. But it ran well. Our mortality numbers were strong. Our patient satisfaction scores were above the national average. Our door to provider times were tight. I was proud of what we had built. Every single person on that team had earned their place with blood, sweat, and the kind of bone, deep fatigue that civilians do not understand. Then Garrett Holloway arrived. He came on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays in the ER are oddly calm, statistically our lowest volume day. And I was in the break room eating a turkey sandwich that tasted like cardboard, wrapped in resignation, when Maria poked her head in and said there was a mandatory department meeting at 4. I asked who called it. She said the new chief operations administrator. I asked when we got one of those. She said last week. Nobody had told us. He was standing at the front of our small conference room when I walked in. 33, maybe 34 years old. Slim fit navy suit. Brown Oxford shoes, so polished they reflected the fluorescent lights. Hair parted with geometric precision. He had one of those smiles that management consultants practice in mirrors. Wide enough to show confidence, tight enough to withhold warmth. Behind him was a projected slide deck. The title slide read, Emergency Department Optimization, A Path to Excellence. There was a stock photo of a stethoscope next to a bar graph. I felt my sandwich turn to cement in my stomach. He introduced himself as Garrett Holloway, MBA, Masters in Healthcare Administration from a university I will not name, but you have heard of. He told us he had been brought in by the hospital's parent corporation too, and I am quoting directly here, align the emergency department's operational throughput with system-wide efficiency benchmarks. He said this with the cadence of someone who believed every single word. Around me, I watched 14 nurses, 3 attending physicians, and 2 physician assistants go very, very still. It was the stillness of prey animals, hearing a branch snap. Then he started clicking through slides. He had charts showing our average patient length of stay. He had graphs comparing our bed turnover rate to peer institutions. He had a color-coded matrix. I swear to God, a color-coded matrix ranking our diagnostic imaging utilization against some national efficiency index I had never heard of. And every single chart, every graph, every smug little data point was framed to say the same thing: we were too slow. We ordered too many tests. We kept patients too long. We were, according to Garrett Holloway and his spreadsheets, inefficient. I raised my hand. He looked at me with the polite impatience of a man who had anticipated pushback and already categorized it as irrelevant. I said, Garrett, we are a level 1 trauma center. Our average patient acuity is significantly higher than the institutions you are comparing us to. Half those peer benchmarks are community hospitals that redirect anything above a broken wrist. He smiled that mirror-practiced smile and said he appreciated my perspective, but the data was the data, and it was time to evolve beyond anecdotal reasoning. Anecdotal reasoning. 22 years of keeping people alive, and he called it anecdotal reasoning. I felt Maria's hand touch my forearm under the table. A warning. I swallowed what I wanted to say and sat back. Over the following 3 weeks, the policies came down like artillery shells. First, he cut overnight nursing staff by 30%. He showed us a utilization model that, according to his calculations, proved we were over-resourced between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. I pointed out that our most critical traumas arrive between midnight and 4 a.m. Drunk driving hours, bar fight hours, the hours when the city's violence finds its rhythm. He told me the model accounted for surge capacity. I asked him what surge capacity looked like with 2 fewer nurses on the floor. He told me I was being dramatic. Second, he mandated a 90-minute maximum for ER patient stays. 90 minutes from door to disposition, admission, discharge, or transfer. If you have ever been in an emergency room, you know that 90 minutes is enough time to start an IV, run basic labs, and maybe, if you are lucky, get a single imaging result back. It is not enough time to rule out a pulmonary embolism. It is not enough time to monitor a head injury for delayed hemorrhage. It is not enough time to do medicine. When I told him this in a meeting, he said the data showed that most emergency departments with strong leadership could meet or exceed that benchmark. I asked him which data. He said it was proprietary to his consulting framework, proprietary. The man had built a policy around data he would not show us for a department he did not understand, treating patients he had never touched. Third, and this was the one that made my blood run cold, he restricted what he called non-indicated diagnostic imaging. In plain language, he created a list of complaint categories for which CT scans, MRIs, and certain X-ray series could no longer be ordered without pre-authorization from a utilization review nurse who reported directly to him. Abdominal pain in patients under 40, no CT without pre-auth. Headache without neurological deficit, no imaging. Chest pain in low risk categories. Straight to discharge without patient follow-up. I have been a doctor long enough to know that the 28-year-old with just a headache is 1 time out of 50 bleeding into her brain, and the only way to know which time is the one is to look. He wanted us to stop looking. I fought him. I want you to know that. I fought him in every meeting. I sent emails with citations, peer-reviewed journal articles, morbidity and mortality data, case studies from hospitals that had tried similar throughput models and seen patient outcomes crater. I brought Maria with me to present nursing workflow concerns. I asked our department's other senior attending, a woman I deeply respect, to co-sign a formal objection letter to the hospital's chief medical officer. We sent it. The CMO responded with a single paragraph thanking us for our input and reminding us that operational decisions fell under the administrative chain of authority. Garrett Holloway read that letter too. I know because he called me into his office the next day, an office that used to be our supply closet, by the way, which tells you everything. And he sat behind his new glass desk and told me, with his voice pitched low and steady like a man delivering a terminal diagnosis, that he respected my clinical experience, but that I needed to decide whether I was going to be part of the solution or part of the problem. He told me that resistance to change was the number one predictor of departmental failure. He said this to a man who once performed a thoracotomy in a moving ambulance because the patient would not have survived the 4 remaining minutes to the hospital. I walked out of his office, went to the break room, poured a cup of coffee that tasted like boiled regret, and made a decision. I was done fighting. Not done caring, never done caring, but done trying to protect a man from himself when he had every lever of institutional power, and I had nothing but experience he did not value. I sat down with Maria that evening during a quiet stretch, and I told her what we were going to do. Her eyes went wide. Then they went narrow. Then she nodded slowly, the way she nods when a trauma is incoming and she is already 3 steps ahead. We were going to comply. Fully. Completely. Maliciously. Every single policy followed to the letter, no more going above and beyond to compensate for his staffing cuts. No more quietly ordering the CT anyway and burying it in the charting. No more staying past shift to cover the gaps his model created. We would do exactly, precisely, and only what his policies allowed. And we would document everything, every decision forced by his protocols, every patient interaction constrained by his benchmarks, every email, every memo, every timestamped note in the medical record reflecting that clinical judgment had been overridden by administrative policy. I told Maria to spread the word to the nurses she trusted. I told the other attendings. Nobody argued. They were tired too. The documentation began immediately. I created a personal log, date, time, patient complaint, what I would have ordered, what the policy permitted outcome. Maria did the same for nursing. Within a week, we had a paper trail thick enough to choke a filing cabinet. And Garrett Holloway had no idea. He was too busy preparing for his efficiency showcase. Oh, I haven't told you about that yet. He had invited 3 members of the hospital's board of directors to visit the ER on a Friday night, prime time, our highest volume window, to personally witness the transformed department operating under his new framework. He sent an email about it with the subject line, showcasing our new standard of excellence. I read it and felt something between nausea and anticipation. The Friday came, October 19th. I will remember that date for the rest of my life. The shift started at 7 p.m. I was on as the senior attending. Maria was charge nurse. We had our skeleton crew, Garrett's skeleton crew, 7 nurses for 32 beds, down from the 10 we normally ran on a Friday night. 2 residents. 1 physician assistant. That was it. Garrett arrived at 7:30 in a charcoal suit with a visitor badge clipped to his breast pocket like a medal of honor. Behind him walked 3 board members, 2 men in their 60s, with the cautious expressions of people who had been promised something impressive, and a woman in her 50s who I recognized as the board's chair of the quality committee. She looked at the ER, the way a health inspector looks at a kitchen. I liked her immediately. For the first 90 minutes, things were manageable. We had our usual Friday flow. A couple of chest pains, a laceration, a child with a fever, 2 anxiety attacks, and an elderly man with a urinary tract infection who kept calling me son, even though I was older than his youngest child. Garrett walked the board members to the department like a museum docent, pointing at monitors, quoting throughput numbers, gesturing at the patient tracking board with the pride of a man showing off a painting he did not create. He used the phrase data-driven care model 4 times in 20 minutes, I counted. Then the radio crackled. I heard dispatch first. Multi-vehicle accident on the interstate, mile marker 47. Initial reports were 7 vehicles, including a charter bus. Unknown number of casualties. Fire and rescue on scene. Multiple ambulances en route. ETA first unit, 11 minutes. My body knew before my brain did. The adrenaline hit my bloodstream like an electric current. I could taste copper in the back of my throat, that old familiar taste that only comes when the machinery of survival kicks in and your body starts borrowing energy from tomorrow. Maria was already moving. I saw her cross the floor in 4 strides and hit the phone to call the nursing supervisor for backup staff. I turned to my residents and said, clear every bed. You can move the stable patients to the hallway. Get me 2 more IV setups in Trauma 1 and Trauma 2. They moved. Then the second call came. And this is the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Industrial accident at a chemical processing plant 6 miles east of the hospital. Explosion. At least 9 workers injured. Chemical burns and possible inhalation injuries. Hazmat protocols in effect. Second wave of ambulances being dispatched. ETA, 14 minutes. A mass casualty event on a Friday night with 7 nurses. Under a 90-minute disposition policy with restricted diagnostic imaging. With 3 board members standing in my emergency department watching. I looked at Garrett Holloway, and for the first time since he had arrived in his polished shoes and his pivot tables, I saw something real in his face. It was not understanding, not yet. It was the faintest shadow of doubt, the first cold finger of the possibility that he might be wrong, pressing against the base of his skull. He blinked. He adjusted his tie. He said, I am sure your team can handle this efficiently. I said, yes, sir. We will follow protocol. And we did. God help us, we did. The first ambulances arrived at 8:42. 2 critical patients from the highway pileup, a woman with a crushed pelvis, and a teenage boy with a tension pneumothorax. I took the boy myself. His chest was swelling on the left side, his trachea deviating, his oxygen saturation dropping like a stone thrown off a bridge. I got the needle decompression in, heard the hiss of air escaping the chest cavity, watched his sats climb back. He was going to live, but he needed a chest tube and a CT of his thorax to rule out aortic injury. I reached for the order screen and stopped. Chest trauma, patient under 40. Per Garrett Holloway's imaging protocol, a CT required pre-authorization from the utilization review nurse, who was not on shift tonight because Garrett had cut her Friday hours. I looked at Maria. She looked at me. I documented it. I wrote in the chart in clear, legible text. CT chest indicated per clinical judgment. Unable to obtain pre-authorization per departmental imaging protocol, policy directive dated October 3rd, authored by G. Holloway. Proceeding with clinical monitoring only pending authorization. Then I moved to the next patient. And the next. And the next. They came in waves. The highway victims first, broken bones, lacerations, a pregnant woman with abdominal pain who needed an ultrasound that took 20 minutes we did not have. Then the chemical plant workers, 3 with second-degree burns across their arms and faces, 2 with respiratory distress from inhaled fumes, 1 with a chemical splash injury to both eyes who was screaming in a pitch that I will hear in my sleep until the day I die. My 7 nurses were drowning. Maria was triaging at the door with the efficiency of a combat general, but efficiency cannot create nurses out of thin air. She had called for backup, but the supervisor said it would be 30 to 40 minutes. The hospital was running lean across the board. Garrett's system, wide staffing model at work. The 90-minute clock was ticking on every patient, Per policy, I was supposed to disposition each one within that window. So I did. I followed the policy. The man with the minor laceration from the pileup, sutured and discharged in 60 minutes. The anxious young woman with chest tightness and no cardiac history. EKG normal, discharged per low risk protocol. No troponin trend, no observation period. Policy said she was low risk. Policy said she could go. I documented the policy reference in her chart and moved on. My hands were steady. My stomach was not. At 9:27, the woman I had discharged, the one with the chest tightness, collapsed in the waiting room. Full cardiac arrest. V-fib on the portable monitor. She was 29 years old. If I had kept her for the standard 4-hour troponin trend, I would have caught the NSTMI that was quietly destroying her inferior wall. But the policy said 90 minutes. The policy said low risk. I had complied. My team descended on her, and we got her back. 3 rounds of CPR, 2 shocks, a drip that stabilized her rhythm. But she was intubated and heading to the ICU instead of home. I looked across the department and found Garrett Holloway. He was standing near the ambulance bay doors, pressed against the wall like a man trying to melt into the paint. His suit jacket was off. His tie was loosened. The 3 board members were standing 10 feet from Trauma 1 watching my teamwork. The quality committee chair had her phone out. I do not know if she was recording or taking notes, but her face was the color of ash. The chaos did not stop. At 10:15, a 9-year-old girl from the highway accident was brought in by her father. She had been complaining of arm pain and had been triaged as a low acuity extremity injury, a possible forearm fracture. Per imaging protocol, simple extremity films were still authorized, but the X-ray tech was buried with the chemical burn patients. The wait for imaging stretched to 40 minutes. In that time, I examined her arm. It was swollen, yes, but something bothered me. The mechanism of injury was high speed. She had been in the back seat of a car that rolled. I wanted a CT of her abdomen. Children hide internal injuries. They compensate until they cannot, and then they crash with almost no warning. But she was 9. Abdominal pain not reported. Per the protocol, no CT. I documented my concern. I documented the policy restriction. I wrote clinical suspicion for occult abdominal injury. Unable to obtain CT per imaging restriction protocol. Will monitor. 20 minutes later, her blood pressure began to drop. Her heart rate climbed. She was bleeding internally. A splenic laceration, we later confirmed. If I had been able to scan her when my instincts told me to, we would have caught it before she became hemodynamically unstable. Instead, we caught it when she went pale and her father started screaming for help. We got her to the OR in time. She survived. But that little girl spent 4 days in the pediatric ICU because a man with an MBA thought he knew which CT scans were necessary. I cannot describe to you what the department looked like at 11 p.m. that night. I have seen mass casualty events before. I have seen the organized chaos that a well-staffed, well-resourced ER can manage through skill and grit. This was not that. This was a skeleton crew held together with tape and adrenaline, operating under policies designed by a man who had never held a dying person's hand, trying to practice medicine inside a framework that had been designed to practice accounting. Patients were lined up in the hallways on gurneys. 2 nurses were crying, not from sadness, from exhaustion and fury. One of my residents, a second year who had been solid as granite all night, pulled me aside and said, with a voice that trembled only slightly, I do not feel safe. I told her to document that. She did. Garrett Holloway tried to leave at 11:30. I know this because Maria saw him edging toward the exit and said, loudly enough for the board members to hear, Mr. Holloway, are you available to authorize the imaging pre-approvals that are pending? You are the only authorization path currently active. Because your utilization review nurse is not here tonight. Per your schedule. He stopped. He turned. He looked at Maria with the expression of a man who has just realized that the floor beneath him is not marble but glass, and it is cracking. The board's quality committee chair stepped forward then. I did not hear everything she said because I was managing a patient with respiratory failure in trauma 2, but Maria told me afterward. She said the chair asked Garrett very calmly how many patients were currently in the department, what the average wait time was, and whether any patients had experienced adverse events attributable to the new protocols. Garrett stammered. He actually stammered. Maria said he looked like a student who had been asked to present a book report on a book he had not read. The chair then asked to see the imaging authorization protocol document. Garrett said it was in his office. She said she would wait. He never came back that night. The shift ended at 7 a.m. I had been on my feet for 12 hours. My scrubs were stained with blood that belonged to at least 6 different human beings. My hands smelled like nitrile and iodine. My back ached in a place that only years of bending over gurneys can produce. But I was alive. My patients were alive. All of them. By some combination of skill, luck, and the kind of institutional memory that no spreadsheet can capture, we had pulled every single one of them through. The woman who coded in the waiting room was stable in the cardiac ICU. The little girl with the splenic laceration was out of surgery and expected to recover fully. The boy with the pneumothorax was breathing on his own. We had one. But we had one in spite of the system, not because of it. The following Monday, I received an email from the hospital's chief medical officer requesting a meeting. I brought my documentation. All of it. Every timestamp note, every charted policy reference, every email I had sent warning of exactly this outcome. Maria brought hers. The other attendings brought theirs. We laid it out on the conference table like an autopsy report, because that is what it was. An autopsy of a system that had died on the operating table of Garrett Holloway's ambition. The board launched a formal review that same week. I was asked to present to the full board the following Thursday. I wore my white coat. I brought my data. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The numbers spoke. The chart spoke. The near miss report spoke. The incident reports from that Friday night read like a horror novel written by someone who understood medical terminology. When I finished, the room was silent for 11 seconds. I know because I counted. It is a habit from the ER. Counting seconds of silence tells you whether someone is about to code. Garrett Holloway was terminated the following Friday. I heard he cleaned out his glass desk, the one in our former supply closet, in under 20 minutes. No farewell email, no exit presentation. No efficiency metric could optimize the speed of his departure, but he managed to be remarkably efficient about it. Anyway, the board restored our nursing staff within 2 weeks. The imaging restrictions were rescinded immediately. The 90-minute disposition policy was replaced with clinical judgment-based guidelines developed by me and the other senior attendings. The quality committee chair personally called me to apologize on behalf of the board. She said something I have thought about every day since. She said, we hired him because he told us he could make the numbers better. We forgot that the numbers represent people. I went back to work the next Monday. The ER smelled the same antiseptic burnt coffee, the faintly metallic undertone of blood that never fully leaves the tile grout no matter how many times housekeeping scrubs it. The monitors beeped their eternal rhythm. Maria was at the charge desk with a fresh assignment board and a look on her face that said, I dare you to send me another MBA. My residents were ready. The ambulances would come. The traumas would roll in. The city would keep breaking itself, and we would keep putting it back together, one patient at a time, with hands that knew what they were doing. And somewhere out there, a man with a glass desk and a very expensive education was updating his LinkedIn profile, describing his tenure here as a strategic leadership engagement focused on healthcare operational transformation. He probably still believes he was right. Men like him usually do. They walk into systems they do not understand, measure things that do not matter, cut things that are holding everything together, And when the building starts to crack, they call it a staffing issue or a culture problem or resistance to change. They never, ever look at the mirror because the mirror would show them something their MBA did not prepare them for, the face of a person who almost got people killed because they were too arrogant to listen. I will tell you what I know after 22 years in the emergency room. Medicine is not a business. It can exist inside a business. It can be funded by a business, but the act itself, the laying of hands on a suffering person, the reading of a body's distress signals, the split second decision between two imperfect options when a life hangs on the choice. That is not an operation to be optimized. That is a craft, and craft demands respect. It demands humility. It demands the wisdom to know that the person who has done the thing 10,000 times might understand something that your model does not capture. The emergency room does not care about your degree. It does not care about your title, your slides, your throughput metrics, or your color-coded matrix. It cares about one thing only. When those doors burst open and the blood is real and the clock is ticking and someone is looking at you with eyes that are begging you to save them, are you ready? Do you know what to do? Have you earned the right to stand in that room? That is the only benchmark that matters, and no spreadsheet in the world can measure it.